before, so it's going to take some getting used to. So if you guys will just bear with me on that. Good morning. It is a beautiful day, sunny. I think the high is 73. It's great to be here, and it's good to see everybody out. We're going to start in Joshua chapter 2. Joshua chapter 2. First, I want to do a quick recap of chapter 1. So, in the first section of chapter 1, we see God directly addressing Joshua. And his message to Joshua is fairly simple. First of all, he says, it's time to go west of the Jordan and possess the promised land. The second thing he says is, be strong and courageous. And certainly this was going to apply to the coming battles. But the crux of God's message was, know my law and obey it. Live it in your lives. Do my will. And that was going to equal success for the entire nation. That's what was going to equal prosperity. Next, we see Joshua send out his call to action. He's saying, be prepared to cross the Jordan in 3 days. And then finally, Joshua addresses the eastern tribes. So we're talking about Reuben, Gad, and eastern Manasseh. If you think back to Numbers 32, we see an agreement was made, and Joshua reminds these tribes of their agreement that they had with Moses and Eleazar the priest. So in order to receive their tribal lands east of the Jordan, they were going to have to help fight the battles west of the Jordan. And only after those battles were over could they return home east of the Jordan. So I just wanted to show you this on the map. Picturing this in our heads, I think, can really help us keep things straight. So, of course, up here we have the Sea of Galilee, and the River Jordan runs down here to the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. So the three tribes we're talking about are eastern Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. So the fighting men from these tribes were going to have to cross over and help their brethren with the battles, all in here. So this is the agreement that Joshua is reminding them of. So their response is, we'll do whatever you say and we'll go wherever you send us. So they're holding up their end of the bargain. They also had a final exhortation for Joshua. Be strong and courageous. So it seems like there's this unified message. Moses had told Joshua and the people back in Numbers and Deuteronomy, be strong and courageous. Joshua's heard it directly from God. And now the people are also telling Joshua, be strong and courageous. Everyone seems to be on the same page. So that brings us to chapter 2. We're going to find the very powerful story of Rahab and the spies. If you've ever been in any of the Old Testament classes that I've taught, you know that I just love stories. And their inherent value in these Old Testament stories. Stories stay with us in a way that a list of rules cannot. So these are very important to us, and they teach us so much. All right. Brother Ed, will you read Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 for us?
Then Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, go, view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came into the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. It was told the king of Jericho, saying, behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land.
Okay, so Joshua is sending 2 spies. I wonder if this was reminiscent of the days when he and Caleb went into the land to spy it out. He sends the 2 spies across the Jordan. There were different places they could ford. They're going to check out the land and end up in Jericho. That's where he especially wants them to focus. Okay, so back to the map here. We have, it's not real clear, and I apologize. Over here we have Shittim. That's where the Israelites were camped. But just across the Jordan is Jericho here. Not too clear, but you can see where the laser pointer is. They're pretty close. All of this is just about the size of New Jersey. So we're only talking about between 8 and 10 miles here between their camp and the city. So not that far at all. I wanted to ask, why do you think that the spies would have come and stayed at a house of ill repute? This was an inn, it seems like. So Rahab was running an inn, but it was also, as we would say, a house of ill repute. Any thoughts on that?
She would take strangers.
Okay, so it would not be uncommon for a stranger to come into town. This would be sort of an inconspicuous place, I guess you could say. A lot of people would have probably come and lodged there or visited there, so to speak. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, they thought it might be a good place to hide, for sure. I suspect that this is exactly what God wanted to happen. He knew who Rahab was. God's all-knowing. He knew her heart, and he had a plan for her. And I think through his providence, he probably guided these men there. Whether they knew it or not, I doubt they would have known this. But it seems to be the case since she played an important role in the plan of salvation.
A lot of things could be thought. It was on the wall. Therefore, when the walls fell in, it did. One small piece did not fall in. So the power of God, he could make everything fall one way, the other one piece didn't.
Yeah,
Nobody in there was harmed. Everybody else on the outside was probably crushed.
that's a good point. Yeah, these guys may have been looking for the place where there was a window that they knew was built into the wall. That would have been to their advantage, for sure.
Also, if they needed to escape, I think that was, as you said, the providence of God.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. All right. Is Brother Buford here? Okay, Brother Buford, if you'll please read verses 3 through 7 for us.
And unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entering into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country. And the woman took the two men and hid them, and said thus, There came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of shutting out the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for ye shall overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. And the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords. And as soon as they which pursued after them were gone out, they shut the gate. Okay.
Is this city on high alert? Oh, yeah. The army of the Israelites is close, and they know it. They have people on the lookout, so if there's strangers that come into the city, they are going to be acutely aware that this is someone who's different. And so, as you read, they tell the king. It turns out they knew quite a bit more than just the fact that an army was there. And we're going to see that in just a minute. Some of the things that Rahab says clues us in on some of the things that they knew. But it's much more than is hinted at here. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. So despite what Rahab is saying to the soldiers here, we see that she's hidden the men on the roof. So they're hiding in these stalks of flax. That probably sounds kind of weird to us. These stalks of flax, why are on the roof? What are they? More than likely, what I read, they were probably being dried. The fibers from flax can be used to make linen cloth. So it was probably very useful to ancient people. But if you were wondering what was going on with that's probably it. So we have soldiers being sent away on this wild goose chase, and they're looking for the spies. It says they shut the gates after they left. So now at this point in the story, if we didn't know what was going to happen, it appears that the spies are trapped in the city. They're in a very dangerous situation. And it looks like they're stuck at this point. All right, any comments so far on verses 1 through 7? We're gonna do a couple of questions here. Okay, question number 1 in your lesson. Discussion. What are the possible reasons that Jericho was selected as the site of the first battle in conquest of the land? Anybody have any thoughts there? It was a very worldly city? Okay.
So many idols. Well, their people were worldly and worship. Giving people a sacrifice or all that. So
Okay, so a very immoral lifestyle. It may have been that God was making an example of this city first. Okay. What else?
what's going to happen to you?
Yeah.
It's very close. So the person they would come across.
Yeah, geographically, when they cross the Jordan, it's one of the first big obstacles that they're going to cross. So just practically speaking, yeah, that may have definitely had something to do with it. We saw on the map that they're very close.
The other thing would be the nature of the city and the walls, that when it was destroyed, it would send a message all through Canaan.
Oh, yeah.
God was going to do it.
Did it ever send a message? Yeah, you're absolutely right. This was a fairly large, fortified city. So an early defeat would have demoralized them and had them quake in their boots, so to speak.
They were already afraid.
Okay, yeah, that's true. We're going to see more about that in just a minute.
We need to build off of both those answers. The idea, obviously, proximity, it's a city with great walls. 10 of the 12 spies were afraid of this, which is why the people had to wander. But now we're crossing again. The land hasn't changed. We read a little bit later here in this chapter that we know about your people and what you have done, so we're already afraid of you. The fear of Jericho, what about the fear of the Israelites about to cross and attack a city with walls? They haven't done this before. We've had battles, but we haven't sacked the city yet. And then the crazy instructions they're giving a couple of chapters later on how we're going to take this city, but getting the people to rely on God. These are the descendants of the people that said, we're not going to do what you told us to, and so they all died off. These are their children having to come back to the realization of God is in control, we are to follow Him, staying with His word, as Josh was instructed in chapter 1. I'm with you as long as you stay with me, and we see that falter a couple chapters later, and the people have to keep coming back to God. It's still that same mindset. We're training. Why is it the first city? Proximity, great walls to show fear to people in Canaan, but also to reassure God's people of He's with us, He's going to take care of us as long as we follow what He's instructed for us to do.
Okay, very good. So we're getting the perspective from the Canaanites, but you're telling us about the perspective of the Israelites too. This would have boosted their morale in a great way, and all the things that you're saying. This would be a sign from God, this unusual way that they're taking the city, that He is going to be with them, and this is going to work. So this would increase their faith, all of the things that you're saying. So excellent comments. All right, how about question number 2 there? Discussion. Discuss the deception of the 2 men who were spies and the lie that Rahab told. Were both groups right or wrong? Was Rahab justified for telling a lie in order to save the lives of both her family and the spies? So these are some tough questions here to think about. Really just something for us to consider. Before we answer these questions, I do want to read a couple of verses on what the New Testament says about Rahab. And there's a couple of questions these at the end of the lesson, so we may come back to them. But she's praised for her faith in the book of Hebrews, and James tells us she was justified by her actions. Now, as Ed told us this morning, justified basically means she was declared innocent. So this is something that the Bible is saying about Rahab, so definitely we need to take it into account. So Hebrews 11:31 says, "By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. So she's praised for her faith here. And James 2:25 says, likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works when she had received the messengers and had sent them out another way. So we know what Rahab has done for the men. First of all, did she lie? Absolutely. Yeah, she lied at least 3 times. She said, I don't know where they're from. She did. She knew exactly who they were. And she said when it got dark and it came time to shut the gate, they left. They had already gone out of the city. That was not true. And then she says, I don't know where they went. Well, she had them. So she definitely lied. So James says she was justified by her actions. Was she justified in telling a lie? No. Okay. And I think that's absolutely the right answer. If you say yes, you're getting into some dangerous territory because then it becomes ambiguous as to when lying is wrong. It seems that Scripture is black and white. Lying is wrong. Did anybody have any comments on that?
One thing, Greg, that we see is throughout Israel's history, God uses other nations to punish Israel, like the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And of course, we know these nations were not righteous nations, but God was able to use them. So, God had a plan in motion. People did things. He was able to use these things, whether they're right or wrong, to accomplish his goals.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. In our lives, the end does not always justify the means. It matters how we get to an end result. So as Christians, we always need to keep that in mind. In Rahab's defense, I think it might be worth mentioning that at this point, she's really not under the law of Moses like the Israelites were. I think she did what she could to help the 2 spies at this point in time. So she's praised for her belief and she's praised for her actions, but she's never praised in the Scriptures for lying. So just something to consider there. Okay, what about the spies and their deception? I mean, really, isn't this what spies do? When you think about it, they deceive in order to gain intelligence, and then they use that intelligence to defeat the enemy. Is that okay? Is it okay when it's on behalf of a nation? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I think it can fall along the same lines of God, gave the command not to not killing. If he's telling these people to go into the land and kill someone.
Okay.
God has assigned these men to do a job. They've got to do the job.
Okay. Very good. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay.
I think there's a distinction when you look at Romans 13 as the acting as an individual and acting for the government.
Okay.
So what Jeff said, it's wrong to take vengeance, Romans 13, but the law does not carry the sword in vain. So who's going to execute that judgment? It has to be an individual, but in the name of the law.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to get at when I said, are things different in a time of war? There are things that God wanted these people to do, and this is what Jeffrey was saying too, that had to be carried out. There had to be someone who was going to do them. So, again, some tough questions, some things to consider. Any other comments on that before we move on?
I have one more.
Okay.
These spies, these 2 spies, they were secret, their identities were secret to both the Israelites and the Canaanites because they were on a secret mission.
Okay.
It isn't revealed to anyone until the narrator gives us the information. Not even the mission was revealed. Nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Until we read about it.
Okay. All right. Good deal. Anything else?
God, their deception is not necessarily approved, but God allows a lot of things that are not approved, but by the same token, we see coming into play that even though God under normal circumstances wouldn't approve those things. He still has a way of delivering us, and we still seeing his grace coming in display, and we seeing everything work out according to his plan. But it tells us that even there are some things that wouldn't fall in line with God, they, by the same token, can be used in accomplishing his plan.
Okay, very good. All right. Jeffrey, do you mind reading verses 8 through 14 for us?
Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to the Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then the Lord gives us the land. We will deal kindly and faithfully with you.
Okay, so looking at question number 3, list the 2 historical events that Rahab mentioned as reasons the citizens of Jericho were afraid of Israel's God. So what's the 2 things that she mentions? Parting of the Red Sea, and what else?
Defeating of the 2 kings on the eastern shore.
That's right. The defeat of Sihon and Og. These were 2 powerful kings that had a lot of land and a lot of manpower at their disposal. So the Israelites had victories in several cities east of the Jordan and had taken over that land. What was Rahab's response when she heard this? And really, what was all the people's response? Fear. Yeah, absolutely. If you read what she says, the terror of you has fallen us. All the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. When we heard it, our hearts melted. No courage remained in any man any longer. So they were terrified. But what did that lead her to next? It didn't lead everyone to this conclusion. But what did it lead Rahab to? I think I heard someone say faith. And that's absolutely right. Look what she confesses about the Lord. She says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. And then really she makes this great confession. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth below. It's a statement of great faith based on what little she knows. So, think about us reading the Bible. We hear these stories. I mean, really, we should have the same response, I think. Fear, respect for the Lord, and that should develop into a faith. Part B of that question says, what was the approximate time span between the 2 events? About 40 years, yeah. That's right. So Rahab cited these 2 events that happened over quite a period of time. Is there any significance to that?
She wasn't a young woman, if that means anything. Plus, the fact they've been keeping up with it. I guess that would mean they've been keeping up. Hey, we know from 40 years ago what happened when y'all left Egypt.
Yeah.
And then y'all wandered through the wilderness and then show up here and destroy 2 powerful nations across the river for us.
That's right. People knew. The things that the Israelites were doing were not done in a bubble. If you think about the size of the Israelite camp, the upper estimates would have been around 2 million people. So there's no way that the things that were going on were done in a bubble. People knew what happened. I wanted to read you just 3 verses from Exodus 15. This would have been within the first year after they departed Egypt. And this is people's response to the people of Israel crossing the Red Sea. So you can see what they thought here. This is in the lyrics of the Song of Moses, if you're familiar with that. But this tells what people in the area felt. So Exodus 15:14 says, "The peoples have heard, they tremble, anguish has gripped the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. The leaders of Moab, trembling grips them. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm, they are motionless as stone, until your people pass over, O Lord, until the people pass over whom you have purchased," which is an interesting statement in and of itself. So they're way down here. They crossed the Red Sea. People up in Philistia knew this happened. People in Moab knew it happened. So none of this was done in secret. All the Canaanites knew. And this was in the first year of them leaving Egypt. So we think news travels fast today, but it traveled fast back then as well. Any other comments on question 3 there? Absolutely. And that's a great comment. This story about Rahab is just so important. Okay, question number 4 here. Hey.
Maybe the other thing that goes with it is the "I know" in verse 9 is more like the knowledge that John talks about in 1 John 2, where it's not an intellectual awareness, but it's a knowledge that causes and motivates action. So it's not that she just was aware of it, but because she was aware, there's a degree of faith, and that faith caused action on her part. Not just, I know something, but because I know that I must.
And that's awesome. What you guys are outlining is biblical faith. It acts. It's not inactive. It's not just an acknowledgement.
I was going to say that she knew. She says in verse 11, "We know that the Lord your God rules heaven and earth, and we've lost our courage." So along the way, her family became weak. But then in the end, she didn't want to just save herself. She wanted to save her family.
She had a good heart. Yeah. She wasn't in it just for herself. This was about her family too. Yeah. Great comments.
Well, just hiding a spy took a lot of faith too, because she would have been killed.
She's really turning her back on her people, whom she seems to have come to a realization that they're not as they should be. So, yeah.
She had similar courage to Joshua.
She did. Absolutely. It's difficult to stand up. It's difficult to stand up when nobody else is agreeing with you, and this is what she's doing. And
Her family wasn't just her own siblings, it was her parents.
yeah,
Her mother, her father, her brother, her sisters, and their families.
yeah,
It was everybody.
absolutely. Okay, question number 4. What purpose was fulfilled when Jericho's citizens were described as being afraid of Israel and Israel's God? So there was a promise made. What was that promise? And by the way, I think this Exodus verse is probably supposed to be verse 27, not verse 25. So what was the promise that was made to the children of Israel? All the land would come to them, for sure. But what? Okay, all the people would be destroyed. I think these three verses specifically are talking about the dread and the terror and the fear that would come to the people before the Israelites arrived. I think that's what it's getting at. We won't take time to read those verses. I'm having a hard time believing the first bell just rang. All right, let's move on to question 5 here. At what point in the story would you summarize at this point in the story, how would you summarize Rahab's belief about Israel's God, and upon what is this belief based on? Yeah, definitely. What words would you use to describe her belief? Active. Genuine. I would say strong. All of those are great. It was definitely strong. If you're mentioned in Hebrews 11 in a favorable way, I think you can say that faith is strong. Now, the second part of the question, what was it based on? I mean, really, it was based on fear and stories. So she didn't have a deeper understanding of the concepts of the old law. Ideas about Israel being a redeemed people, how God had purchased these people. All of those concepts that you see that, are shadows of Christ and what was to come. She didn't know that, but it was based on fear. I did want to read to you Proverbs 1:7 here. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." So we're talking about biblical faith. Fearing God leads to a proper knowledge, and it leads to wisdom, and it leads to faith. But that faith takes action. And that's some of what you guys have been saying. This is exactly what Rahab had done. She had a good heart.
Back in Exodus, when God was telling the people what would happen as they went into it, He used the word fear, that the people that they came in contact with would fear. He used the word fear. So this fear that Rahab and her people felt was already God had said He was going to fear.
Okay.
Greg, up until the time that the spies entered Rahab's house, we can only speculate her thoughts or her fear or whatever other emotion that she had concerning the children, this band of the children of Israel. 40 years before, they had been delivered from one of the most powerful governments in the land, from the Egyptians. And they didn't raise a hand themselves to do it. God did it all. So those views for 40 years, they had heard of this band of Israelites, this 1.6 to 2 million people in the land. We really don't know what Rahab thought before those two spies showed up at her house, but when they did, it's like, okay, now they're here. I know they're here. I know who they are. I know who their God is. She had a choice to make. And, she could have turned them in, but yet she didn't.
That's right.
It's amazing to really think back and look at all the events that took place. Everywhere the children of Israel went in the wilderness, it was God. They didn't raise their hand to do anything unless God led them to do it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Good comments. So as the story goes along, apparently Rahab's house, as we said, was built into the wall. The spies were lowered to the ground by a rope through the window. So that's how they got outside of the wall and escaped. So then they fled to the hill country for 3 days. And and then they returned to Joshua. What were the three conditions? Question 6, what were the three conditions that Rahab had to meet in order for her and her family to be saved from the hand of Israel? Tie the red cord. Okay, they had to all be in the house, and they couldn't tell the spies business. So that's the three things. So after the spies departed, if you read this, it looks like she tied the cord in the window immediately. That's how it reads. So it seems like she's ready for this. You can't help but admire her for that. So I was going to talk a little bit about conditions that are placed upon agreements and conditions that are placed on covenants. Jeffrey sort of addressed that Wednesday, so we don't necessarily have to get into that. So in verse 22, we see that they make their way back to Joshua, and here is their report. And I can't help but think Joshua would have thought of himself and Caleb. This is their report to Joshua. Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us. And so they give a favorable report and a faithful report to Joshua. Question 7. Discuss the importance of Rahab in the genealogy of Matthew 1. Did anybody have a comment about that? She wasn't a Jew. That's right. And there were at least 4 Gentile women who really would have probably, at first at least, been looked down upon by the Israelites. But I think if you look at the lesson of Rahab, and some of you have said some of this, the Lord can take a person of no reputation that society looks down on, like a Gentile prostitute, and he can make that person a godly servant. And he can do that for us. So, we can accomplish great things. She's an important figure in the conquest, but she's also an important figure in the scheme of redemption because Christ came through her line. She married a guy named Salmon who would have been from what tribe? Judah. So you can see that eventually King David came through that line. We don't have to mention all those people, but a lot of those people were alive during the Judges. And then King David came through that line, and eventually Christ. This is an important story. God has a plan for Rahab, and God has a plan for us, and we need to keep that in mind in our lives. She had to take action. We have to take up our cross. It's just such an important lesson. Apparently, she was able to make a change in her life. Here's some verses from Ezekiel that I wanted to wrap up with. We're not going to have time for 8, 9, and 10. Ezekiel 18:21 says, "If the wicked man turns from all his sin which he has committed and observes all my statutes and practices justice and righteousness, he shall surely live, he shall not die. All his transgression which he has committed will not be remembered against him. Because of his righteousness which he has practiced, he will live." This is a picture of repentance and the fact that God will accept us and that we can turn and serve him and be saved. Any final comments?
He does not look at what we have been. He looks at where we're at, how we accept him from there. Because if we obey him, that's why. And stay faithful.
That's right. He forgets, so to speak, what has come before, and he looks at our lives to see what we are doing and goes from there. Good comments. Okay, thank you so much for the great comments. I really appreciate it. We will pick up with chapter 3 on Wednesday.